Hello, welcome to this APM webinar today. My name is Daniel Nichols. I'm APM's Research Manager. The title of the session today is Swimming with the Big Fish, where we're going to explore the integration of SMEs into supply chains of major projects. Now, firstly, we want this to be as an interactive session as possible, so we'd very much encourage you to get engaged as you can. And we're going to do this today through Slido, which I know a number of you might have used before. And you can take part in a number of ways. You can use the QR code on the screen, or you can join at slido.com. And the reference that you need to use is the hashtag APMBigFish. So firstly, we'd like to know today, what sector are you from? So if you could just take part in that and get involved, it'd be great to hear from you. So I can see this is a few of the responses start to come through. You can type your responses. If you've got any questions about using anything today, also into the questions, but at the moment we're just using Slido. So we can see quite a variety there in terms of background, everything from kind of medical, government, construction, and again, Janet's showing the kind of importance of your session, the importance of SMEs, business consultancy here is the kind of the big leader at the moment. So we just give people a few more seconds to take part in this one, and then we'll move on to our next Slido question. Okay, I think we've pretty much completed that one. So I think from what I recall seeing on the screen that the largest there was around consultants and rail as the largest sectors that people were drawn from today. If we could move through to the next Slido. Oh, I can see we've got some more responses coming through. So this is changing all the time. It's completely dynamic. Okay, so I think we've it's rapidly changing consultant suppliers, so the rapid race to see who's going to win. So I think it's probably about time to move through to the next slide if we can, please. Okay, what we'll do is come back to the Slido and get you involved in that throughout the session. We're just about to kick off our main presentation now. So if we could move through to the next slide, please, Jez. So this is the loose agenda for today. It's going to fall in three parts. So there's going to be a brief introduction from myself, outlining what the session will cover, and mainly about our speaker today and the kind of background to the research. The main part really is about the presentation itself, and then there'll be a Q&A to give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have of this kind of research and the work that Jaz is working on. So if we could click through to the next slide, please. Okay. So today I'd very much like to welcome Dr. Jaz Culver, who is the Assistant Professor in Supply Chain Management at Newcastle University Business School. Now, the background to this research really comes from Jaz's work on supply chain management. A lot of it, when he worked as part of the University of Bath Business School, where he's working very closely with the Hinkley Point C Supply Chain Innovation Lab, which was a partnership between the University of Bath and Hinkley Point C. And the lab, really, its aim was to provide a platform for thought leadership to connect business leaders, policymakers, and academics in the fields of supply chain, innovation, and complex capital projects. There's an article that you may have read over the last couple of years in past editions of Project Magazine. And at the moment, from a research side, we're currently working with University of Bath colleagues to publish some of the key findings in this major research initiative, which we hope will be relevant to project professionals next year in 2022. Following his work at the University of Bath, Jaz then went on to work for UCL, University College London, subsequently developing his research, also as part of the Project X research initiative. And I've included on the screen a link to a recent Project X report, which we published only last month, entitled Rethinking Capabilities, which you can access. So without further ado, and I've also included a brief link to Jaz, so you can see all of his work, all of his articles, if you want to read those at any point. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jaz. He's going to take you through this, everything today, and I will come back after he's finished his sessions to start picking up some of the questions you might have. So I'll hand over to Jaz.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. Over the next 30 to 40 minutes or so, I'd be walking you through the rationale for why you should be working with SMEs in complex projects and supply chains, and then after providing a justification of that rationale, what are some of the steps that you could undertake to integrate SMEs successfully in your supply chains? And then we will talk about some of the challenges and barriers that might prevent you for doing this successfully, or might inhibit some of the processes that are that you'll be undertaking. And finally, a model that provides a structure to this, which is what are the different landscapes that you might have to understand, and what are some of the mechanisms that you could use to successfully integrate and govern SMEs into your supply chain. So this has all been developed majorly from my research with Hinkley Point C, a supply chain innovation lab based at University of Bath, which I've then built that research piece further as part of my work with University College London and now Newcastle University. So I'll start with the presentation now. So in terms of the rationale, let's start with what we found was the economic rationale behind working with SMEs. So one of the first things that we, when we started researching, one of the first things we found that at that time there was a big, of course, collapse of the big giant Carillion at that point. And even though the conversations were already ongoing in terms of working with SMEs, I think that was the time when people really started thinking about, is this model sustainable? Having an intermediary organization who subcontracts to other organizations, is that always the best way? So kind of reducing the risk posed by the middleman. Can we work without the middleman, and can we work directly with some of these organizations who are already part of our supply chain? It's just that we never get to see them. So that was one idea. Also, the more intermediaries you have, they will also have more overhead. So there was a cost reduction rationale there as well. Another thing was that a lot of project supply chains have been very traditional. So, for example, in all of the London projects, there is an already existing ecosystem, an already existing supply network, which organizations can tap into. And so same suppliers or a combination of those suppliers get repeated throughout these different projects. And the idea was that, can there be a sort of a bespoke supply chain? Can there be context? Can there be sort of greenfield projects where we might use a different kind of supply chain? Also, once we have a bespoke supply chain, we might become the client of choice. So our suppliers don't have to think about other clients at the same time. And that was at least the starting point of this idea, that can we have a suppliers that, in the short to medium to long term are loyal to us in many ways. And also, finally, that SMEs have specialized niche capabilities that they have developed over the years. So what the evidence suggests, all the empirical evidence, that SMEs, once they cross a certain threshold for innovation, they are actually faster at developing niche capabilities and adapting to some of the exogenous pressures faster because of the way they are structured than some of the big established organizations where there are more barriers to new capability development. So that was the idea, that by working directly with SMEs, some niche capabilities could be accessed. So that was the economic rationale, and that was a starting point for lots of organizations that we were speaking to at that time. Another idea was this whole idea of delivering social value. As we know, that whether it comes to public projects and public-private projects, and also in some completely private projects, we have to demonstrate social value. There's more and more push towards doing something more than just delivering the project, or if in case of public major projects, the project will start delivering value after 10 15 years, but is there something that we can do right away that will start providing benefits for the people and the community? So that there is a significant push towards that, both from the policy perspective and from the organizations themselves. So kind of if we get behind that idea, then the idea was that if we think about social value, if we start working with SMEs, we can actually, by awarding them contracts or building their capabilities, we can actually start generating value on a more short to medium term basis, rather than kind of just thinking what will happen 10 years or 15 years down the line. The second bit was that if these capabilities are developed during the course of the project, then once the project is done and the client has moved away and the project is in running conditions, these organizations, they ideally won't just disperse. These organizations will stay and they will be self-sustaining and they will be able to bid for other projects. So that was the kind of legacy that these projects, these big projects, these big organizations could leave behind into the region once they develop SME capabilities. And finally, by doing this, they are making a contribution to the local community. So of course, as we know, in a lot of projects, it's the local communities, particularly if these are greenfield projects, it's the local communities who get disrupted the most. So was there a way by that, if we bring some of that prosperity back into the region, will local communities be more supportive to some of these projects being built into their area? So those were the two kind of rationale which at that time were driving these push toward SMEs. Some of my current conversations with project organizations, they reveal that these are still some of the main concerns they have, even after the COVID. They are still thinking about this kind of continuing this build up towards social value, and these rationale will still drive them. Yes. So the next idea is that once we have the intention of working with SMEs, how do we go about working with these SMEs and integrating them into our existing supply chains? So you might have seen some of this in our published article in the Project magazine. There are three main views. There are three main steps when it comes to working with SMEs and integrating them successfully into your supply chains. First is about finding and engaging the right players, both internally and externally. Then building and sustaining legitimacy in that network that you have now established by engaging the right players into this initiative. And finally, once you've built the legitimacy, how can you work with some approaches from a more long-term perspective, not doing something that's just for yourself or short to medium term, but actually taking a long-term view so that you can successfully incorporate these SMEs into your supply chains. So now I'll walk you through each of these steps one by one. So the first step is finding and engaging the right players. So the whole idea is that if you suddenly decide to work with the SMEs in the region, or if you're new to the regional area, chances are that you don't actually know the capabilities these SMEs have or how they map onto your requirements. So you have to go out to the organizations who actually have this information, or who can actually get this information for you. So that's the idea of getting to the right intermediaries. So some of them could be not-for-profit organizations, some of them could be chambers of commerce, NGOs, or local cluster, regional clusters, and they might have this information. They might have a database, existing database. It might not be perfect, but it might give you a starting point to know what is the core capability, or what is a set of core capabilities within this region. So that's kind of finding and engaging the right intermediaries and kind of using them as a proof of concept in this area. The second bit is that, and that's more of an internal thing, is that identifying people in your organizations, and if they're not, then recruiting them, who could be SME champions, who could champion this initiative. So in one of the projects where this was done reasonably with reasonable success, they actually had someone in their organization who was a senior supply chain engagement manager, who was actually from that community. So he was personally invested in bringing prosperity into that region. He was passionate about that. So because this is going to be a long journey, and as we will see, it will also meet with some resistance, both internally and externally. So you need some people you need people who are passionate about getting businesses to SMEs or working with SMEs and make them capable of working with you. So, and as I say, some of the best supply chain managers I've worked with, they never stay in their office. They are always at one or the other supplier's premises, trying to understand them, trying to work with them, working on their joint improvement projects. So understanding their cost structure. So that's something you need for SMEs who knows or who's passionate about working with SMEs. The third step is not only identifying the capabilities of SMEs in the area, but understanding how they map onto your requirements, and not just the current requirements, because in a lot of these major projects that we look at, requirements are not very clear at the outset, but then also thinking about your future requirements. So what do you need, not now, but 5 years down the line? So these SMEs might not have the capability now, but within 5 years, when you need that capability, will they be able to develop that? So sometimes thinking about that potential. And I think a closely linked point of view, a closely linked point with that is the matchmaking bit. So matchmaking, so one is that you map the capabilities, their capabilities onto your requirements, but also now you're matchmaking. In some cases, some of these SMEs might not be placed well to just work directly with you, but they can work with some of your suppliers, some of your other partners, and you can use some of your tier ones probably to work with these SMEs. But then how do you identify who is the right SME for what kind of contract, or what kind of your tier one contractor? And that is the matchmaking bit that you might have to do, or get another organization to do it. And this is something which is being tried out at one of the major projects in the Northwest, Sellafield, where an organization has developed a matchmaker initiative where they are pairing up, where they have developed a set of a capability map of the SMEs, and they're pairing them up with big contractors and trying to understand where they can fit into those requirements. So it's worth checking that out. Then you need to have multiple channels of engagement. So yes, starting point could be you developing a registration portal and getting SMEs to come register, have their capabilities, register their capabilities, and intention to bid to your requirements. So that could be a starting point. But with SMEs, you have to do more. So because a lot of these SMEs might not actually be interested in registering, or they might not actually have faith, to be honest, initially in what you're saying. So they might say that, okay, it's not worth my time. I'll just waste my time registering on this portal and nothing will come out of it. And with some of our research experience tells us that it has happened with some of these SMEs, that they have said that, I've spent so much time on this contract. I knew I was not going to get it, and I didn't get it. So what you need to do is you have to reach out to these SMEs. You have to go to places where they are. So you need formal and informal socialization mechanisms. So formal socializations could be kind of going to their community hall meetings, having flyers, posters, going to their going to their industry cluster supply chain events, or holding supply chain events and inviting them that they can just come and listen to you, and they are able to trust that what you are trying to propose is actually legitimate. But we've also seen that the power of informal socialization mechanisms. So a lot of these SMEs were recruited through, in some of the projects that we studied, they were recruited through informal networks. So they trusted someone who was already at the big organization, at the client organization, and they were just able to hang on to their word, and that social capital helped them engage in SME integration as initiative. So you need a bit of both. You need to have formal and informal socialization mechanism, because you have to understand that at the starting point, you don't have a lot of social capital in the region. Then, of course, visiting the supplier premises, understanding their concerns, because if you haven't worked with SMEs before, you have to understand that SMEs' concerns would be different from the traditional concerns of your traditional contractors. So they might have cash flow issues. They might need shorter payment cycles. So you have to really understand what is it that they actually need, and how I might need to tailor my strategy to these SMEs. So you have to think about that. And finally, it's important to show your face. So in some of the projects that I've studied, the client organization was visible at these community meetings. They were saying that, yes, I am this organization, I am doing this project, I am here and I'm interested in SMEs, so you can trust me. So they were there. And I've seen some of these in some of the other projects where these organizations, they want it to happen, but they don't want their face on it, and they are not leading it from the front. And I've seen that the SME engagement in some of those projects has not been really good. Whereas in the projects where they are there, SMEs become more confident in applying, and you are able to convince them. And in some of these events, these organizations have just said that, come on, just register. It's, you have nothing to lose, just register. And sometimes based on that word of the mouth, and based on that, the confidence they have in the main organization, just by the fact that they are present in that meeting, they're able to do that. Once you've gotten through this first hurdle, which is identifying and engaging with these regional SMEs, what you have done is you have begun to form a network. That network is not formalized yet, but it's a network. You have found a network of organizations who may or may not be willing to work with you. There might be interest, but it's not completely there yet. And that's where the second step begins, where you have to build and sustain legitimacy of the within that network. So what you need to do is that when you're looking at these SMEs, as I mentioned, their payment cycles, their expectations might be really different from traditional contractors. And we know that complex projects, large projects, they take a long time to get approvals. Their processes are long and onerous, and you have to see that some of these SMEs might be nervous in engaging with them. So what you need to do is you have to keep them motivated. How do you keep them motivated? Is that in some of the projects that we studied, they were able to engage them before getting the final go ahead from the government on the project. They were able to give interim contracts to some of these SMEs, give short-term contracts to some of these SMEs, or just work with them, give them, train them on how to work with contracts, work with them on various joint business improvement programs. So if you are engaged and if you are investing, even though your process are outside, the political processes are outside of your control, you might still be able to keep these SMEs engaged. The second bit is having layered requirements. So you might have a contract, you might have a requirement for a particular piece of work, and the SME may or may not have the capability right now to deliver it. But what you might have is a vision of when do you need that contract to deliver. For example, let's think about transportation, right? So you might need to transport 600, 1,000 workers on a daily basis when the project is in its main phase. Now, you might go out looking for a traditional transportation organization, a traditional bus company, who has the capability right now to transport 600 people. And there might be an SME who might not have that capability right now, but has the potential to develop that capability within 5 years when you actually need that capability. So you might think that, do I need this capability now? Do I need to sign this contract right away with this main organization? Or I can work with these set of SMEs and then slowly develop them so that when I really need 6,000 people transported, they are able to develop that capability. So having a more nuanced view of some of the requirements you have is really important, and that means engaging with your own contracts, your own requirements differently, engaging really well with your internal stakeholders and understanding some of these requirements that might be really important. Again, you might need different contracting terms. The contracting terms that you might have for your traditional contractors might not be feasible for some of these SMEs. So you have to understand their requirements, how they contract, or how the contracts can be customized or made easier essentially for some of these SMEs. You have to think about these contracting terms, or if you want some of these contracted terms can't be changed, you have to invest into training and providing some financial support to these SMEs so that they can kind of start delivering on your contracting terms. And finally, you have to think about governance structures. So the traditional governance structure that you have, that you are the client, here is the tier one, and here is the rest of the supply chain, and and you have your tier ones, and your governance is with the tier ones. That might not be feasible in some of these cases. It might still work in some cases, but in some of these cases, you have to think about these structures differently. That can these SMEs work under your tier ones, or can there are some SMEs that you can directly engage with? Can you build an alliance of these SMEs and work with them and contract with them? Or there are other ways of doing this. So you might need to think about governance structure in a different way. So that's how that. So what I really want to say is that the point from where you've recruited these SMEs or you've gotten them interested, and between you actually sign a contract or you select them for delivering your requirements, there is still a lot of work to do. But you also have a lot of time if you are working in a complex project. So use that time wisely and get those SMEs engaged and incorporated. And finally, even when you have signed the contract and you have started working with them, you have to think about not just your benefits, not your short to medium term goals, but you have to adopt a long term view. For example, you have to think about, can you adopt strategies which can make these SMEs or the SME networks that you have developed, can you make them self-sustaining? So can they, once you leave, once they've delivered your requirements, can they go away and bid for other contracts, the contracts that are similar to the size that you have given them? So can they do that? Do they have business development capabilities? So that's important. For that, you might have to invest again in their trainings. For example, you could invest in their training on the NEC contracts, or you can get them into apprenticeships. So that's important. What is also really important at this stage is that if you've gone through this journey once of integrating SMEs into your supply chains, then you might want to do it again. And if you want to do it again, you might want to take away some of the waste, take away some of the inefficiencies, or get past the learning curve. You've been through the learning curve once. Now, how do you do it better this time? So it's really important to work with academics, consultants, people who can actually be on this journey with you and who can help you in codifying this knowledge and getting it structured so that next time you can actually pick up those processes and do it much more efficiently. Also, it's really important to disseminate this knowledge like I'm doing right now, because it just sends the message. If you have been successful in doing this, it sends a message to other projects, other big organizations, that yes, this is possible. It's different, but yes, this is possible. And these are some of the steps you can take to do this. And that's how you develop a self-sustaining SME ecosystem, which is important not only for the region, but for the country as well right now. And finally, there should be an emphasis, and this is traditional relationship management point, but you have to kind of look at continual management of relationship with SMEs. What happens is that in the cycle of these complex projects, from engagement to contracting to negotiation to actual management of contracts, the stakeholders keep on changing. So, and the stakeholders might have different motivations, different ways of working, and SMEs might just be getting ready to be working with you. And so there has to be a continual line of communication, a continual line of engagement strategy that they can hang on to, where they get some stability, so they can actually innovate without being increasingly concerned of what's the next change is going to be. In short, if you're making a change, lead them on that change with you rather than letting them be on their own with the next stakeholder that they're going to have. So this is really important, having a long-term view, and this will require additional investment in terms of your time, effort, resources, but this is what you need to incorporate SMEs into your supply chains. Now we've gone through the first three steps. I will, as you can probably imagine, that this initiative has challenges, and it will definitely raise some barriers. So these are some of the barriers that we uncovered as part of our research. So the first barrier is economic. So yes, if you're developing a bespoke supply chain, it will have upfront costs. So intuitively, it might actually make more sense to work with your traditional contracts rather than investing all this effort upfront, designing a new supply chain, developing new suppliers, and working with these new suppliers. And that's why when you're working with SMEs, cost reduction is something that you will achieve once you're into the contracts after a couple of years, but you can't go with the upfront view of cost reduction with the SMEs, because that's something you're not going to get. Even if their costs and their working capital will be low, there will be a lot of strategic hidden costs that you would have to undertake once you are kind of going through the first two steps of integrating SMEs into your supply chain. SMEs also will have relatively lower risk absorption capacity. So any big change that happens, a big contractor who has experience of working on big projects, they might be able to absorb those. It's debatable, but SMEs, they will need advance notice. They might not be able to absorb the risk without your support. However, some of the recent conversations we have had with managers, and again the intelligent client approach of the Project 13, the new thinking is that even if you are transferring the risk to your suppliers, you're never really away from the risk. You can't escape the risk. So some of the clients are actually saying that rather than me paying insurance premiums to the suppliers, why don't I own the risk? Because ultimately I own the risk. If a transport infrastructure doesn't get delivered, nobody is going to blame those contractors. The public is going to blame me. If a nuclear power plant doesn't get delivered, they're going to blame me. So why don't I, as a client, take that proactive approach, own that risk, and then by owning that risk will open me up for the opportunities. One of these opportunities could be giving some of my contracts to the SMEs and working directly with them. And again, there's also this idea that SMEs are less flexible. Yes, in some cases we have seen that SMEs could be less flexible because they don't have a broad range of capabilities that a traditional contractor might have. So you might have to be careful around your requirements. But then, the other side of the argument on the other side is also that anytime you have a scope creep, you have to pay for it, even to a major contractor. So why not work with a set of SMEs who can actually, with some of your support, they can recruit another SME that can deliver to your evolved requirements. So that's something to think about. The other barrier that you would encounter in this journey is that it requires a shift in traditional thinking. So there is a sense of comfort working with an established supply chain. There is a sense of comfort in knowing that, yes, I am actually following the path that has been well trodden. So there is also less resistance internally if you are kind of going through a tried and tested approach. So that shift in mindset that, yes, I need to be more collaborative. I will need to be more engaged. I will need to invest upfront, more resources upfront. That needs to be understood. So it will require that change in mindset, and it will need to become a collaborative mindset. And there is an argument to be made that, particularly if we look at a lot of sectors are like that, but if we look at particularly the construction sector, there is a lot of room to be collaborative. So, SMEs or not, the collaborative thinking has to slowly be developed. So if that helps you kind of get access to this new variety of suppliers, why not? And it will need a more involved approach from you. So by being more involved, what it means is working, looking at your requirements more carefully, not just kind of having a one-page requirement and thinking about which supplier can deliver me this, but actually understanding your requirements really carefully and understanding what capabilities I might actually require. What capabilities do I have internally? What capabilities are there in the ecosystem? So that would require a bit more involved approach. Your contracting terms and conditions might need to be more tailored. There's an argument that even your contracting language might need to be tailored. So you might need to have a more bonus focused framing for your contract rather than and a penalty focused framing. So you might have to make your clauses sound friendlier and welcoming and collaborative. So it would need a more involved approach. But as we have seen, my argument is that it has been happening before COVID, but as particularly I've seen COVID, COVID has showed us how important our supply chain is. So I think it's worth investing that effort into innovating innovating the processes by which we run our supply chains. And finally, there would be political barriers. There are political barriers, and by political I mean both the big P, the policy, and the small p, the politicking, the internal politics, and the political processes that enable and or constrain work processes. So one of the big policy barriers that organizations have reported is the whole idea of competitive tendering and demonstration of value for money. So the idea is that even if some of the organizations are keen on integrating SMEs into their supply chains, they cannot show preference. They cannot show that, yes, we want SMEs and we would prefer them over any traditional contractors if the value for money doesn't make sense. So competitive tendering and the way it runs some of the public projects is a barrier. Yes, some organizations have tried to navigate around it by either doing private projects, doing some private projects with some of the SMEs, or integrating some of these SME into the lower tiers of their big supply network. So that is a short to medium term solution, but I do feel we need a long term policy solution to this issue, particularly if we want to develop our SME ecosystem. 99% of all UK businesses are SMEs, so we need some thinking around this. And that will need collaboration between policymakers, practitioners, and academics to shape that policy. Now we can also look at some of the politicking. So you will meet some internal resistance. So as a supply chain person, for example, who's operating in a complex project, you might be very much inclined to demonstrating social value. But your project delivery, service delivery managers, they are more focused on cost, quality, time. And they might not actually, it would be fair to say that if a project or a contract doesn't deliver well, they would be responsible. So there might be that internal resistance, and there would be a lot more buy-in required. Again, you will have to sell. You might have to demonstrate some sort of proof of concept that why this approach works, and why are we doing this? As it happens with any new approach that you adopt. And finally, you might also get some resistance from traditional supply chain partners. So if you are a contractor who has supply chains across different projects, and if you indicate a shift towards SME, or if you make a clear shift towards SMEs, you might have to sell that shift to your supply chain partners, that it's not a lose-lose, it's actually a win for all. And you might have to demonstrate that proof of concept and build legitimacy around this initiative. Finally, now that we've gone through this, based on my research over the years, some of it at University of Bath, but subsequently I've spoken with other complex projects and other sectors who are trying to work with SMEs, particularly UK SMEs, is how can we think about this problem a bit differently? How will leadership look a bit different if we want to do this? And what are some of the mechanisms that we would need to invoke in order to do this better? So the whole idea is that if, as a supply chain leader, I want to adopt this approach of working with SMEs, it will need, as I said, a change in behavioral mindset. So it will need to move on from managing and leading. Those are the traditional notions of the leadership. So it will have to move beyond controlling and organizing and driving to orchestrating. So you as a supply chain leader will need to adopt an approach of orchestration, because you are orchestrating these multiple systems, and some of these systems you will have no hierarchical control on. So you will have to take a step back and become the orchestrator of value, orchestrate within and across some of these systems, and adopt a hybrid approach. So by hybrid approach, I mean there is a mix of closed and open system orchestration that you might have to undertake in order to deliver this value. And how that happens, I'll show that to you in a bit. So my starting point is the client firm, or the focal firm, or the organization here, and they have a supply chain, and within that there's a client contractor interface, particularly in the UK construction sector, where the tier 1 contractors there is a strong interface there. So that's the system that already exists. Now what happens is that if you're adopting this approach, then as a client organization, you can no longer just give the contract to your contractor and just monitor it and enforce it from time to time. Actually, you have to use a contract more of as a coordination mechanism. You have to coordinate across the contractor and supply chain and see what you need to do, and see your requirements are being scoped out, managed well, and the capabilities that are in the supply chain and within your contractors are managed really well. So as a client, you have to adopt a much more active, a more coordinating role than before. Then you have another system around this already existing system, which is the SME ecosystem. And the boundary between your existing system and the SME ecosystem, which you haven't tapped into yet, needs to be a lot more porous. So what you would need to do is that you would start by engaging two-way engagement with this SME ecosystem through some of the mechanisms that I've described before. So once you start engaging with them, then you have to facilitate the interactions between the SME ecosystem and your contractors and your supply chain. So you have to, and that's really important to do, because you have to get both parties well versed with the culture, and also show seriousness in this initiative. So you have to facilitate those formal and informal socialization mechanisms. Once this activity is more formalized and you have the go-ahead, and more than the go-ahead, you have the buy-in from your contractors and your supply chain partners, because you have to take them through this journey. You then move towards integrating these SMEs into your supply chains through contracts, through relational mechanisms. You then integrate them into your supply chains. And this is something I'm keeping a bit broad, because when I say supply chain, I mean both the sort of equipment supply chain that you have and also the tier 1 contractors. So based on the SME capabilities, you can integrate them in your overall supply chain. Another important thing that you need to consider is the political landscape that surrounds this whole thing, because this is going to require some policy instruments if we want this to be a long-term solution in the UK. So what you would need as a client firm is you would have to kind of open a conversation, open a channel with the policymakers, where you initially start with liaising. You initially start with, this is your approach, and how you might have to work with them to understand the mechanism by which you can make this happen. And yes, there will be cases where you might not be able to exactly adopt the approach that you wanted to approach, and you might have to make certain adjustments. But then over time, once you make that conversation happen, I hope we can get to a place where we are informing policy as well. So there are long-term policy change, because the government, through their social value initiatives and leveling up, they do seem keen on promoting social value. And I think we as a community of practitioners and academics, we have to come up with solutions as well. So I think over time, hopefully, we can get to a place where we are informing policy as well, rather than just executing it. So I will leave you with this framework, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. My contact details are here as well, so I'll be happy to connect with you after as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jazz, for a really engaging session there. And actually, that really resonated with some of my personal experiences, actually, when I worked as a project manager myself, working for a local enterprise partnership. And, we were often, as you say, in that kind of interface between major projects and people who wanted to get involved in the kind of local supply chain. So, know lots of the things that you talk about. So, as Jazz rightly said, we come to that part of the session where we'd like to take some of the questions from yourself. So if you've got any questions that you'd like to put to Jazz about his research, maybe about his frameworks, anything else that you might have, you could include those into the question section. In the meantime, while we're just waiting for a few of those to kind of come through, I'd just like to raise awareness, which we can put into the chat, about a forthcoming webinar, another research webinar, which is around leadership responding to complexity, which is taking place on the 10th of November. And in this session, the University of Brighton are going to look at how we can go beyond individual leadership competencies and responding to complexity. And they're going to present a framework for assessing and strengthening systemic leadership responses to different themes of complexity encountered in major projects. So again, if that's of interest, look at the events tab at APM, and please sign up to that on the 10th of November. So let's just see if we've got any more questions that have come through at the moment. Can't see any at the moment. Is there one other question, I suppose, to yourself, Jazz, that you might want to consider? Is where can people find out a bit more about your work? I mean, I've included the links to your main page, Newcastle University, which obviously will have some of your publications. How can delegates from today, kind of, if they do go away and they think, actually, I really wish I'd asked that question, how can they find out a bit more about some of the work you're doing currently, some of your research, maybe get involved? Where can they find that?
Yes, so thank you for that, Daniel. I think, yes, in addition to the details that you have on my university page, which kind of details my research in a lot more detail, you will also find the list of my publications. But I think I'm also quite active both on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I try to share insights as much as I can through them as well. So feel free to connect, and if there's something that you want to discuss a bit more specifically, please feel free to send me an email. I always welcome queries, and that's how I worked on a lot of collaborative projects and joint projects with some of the organizations. So please feel free to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. And is this? I mean, we've heard about some of your kind of Project X research that they published last month, which gave a kind of snapshot. Is there any kind of research you're currently working on? I mean, you talked about how people can get involved. Yes. Is there anything, any kind of nuggets of information about forthcoming research you're working on with Newcastle or Project X colleagues that we might want to hear about, that we can look forward to?
Yes, I mean, there's one thing that I'm becoming really passionate about as I've been working on this issue with organizations. So there's this one big issue that I have, that how do you make the lives of SMEs more easier in terms of getting them incorporated in these supply chains. I think the other bit that has emerged with some of these, including private organizations, is that they want to enhance the diversity in their supply chains. So they want to work more with non-traditional suppliers. So they want to work with businesses that are not only small and startups, but also work with women-owned businesses, businesses owned by people of color, businesses owned by underrepresented groups, and they really want to understand what are the right mechanisms to do that. So I think if you're interested in this kind of research, and I'm developing some conceptual ideas, if you're interested in this research, please feel free to connect. I'd be very happy to speak with you about this. And if you know of such an initiative, please feel free to talk to me about this. The other bit that I'm interested in is, and that's an ongoing project, is the problem of data sharing in supply chains. So we know that, yes, we always say that, good relationships between supply chain partners, and we share a lot of information. But now with the proliferation of data and the digital transformation, what are the issues in terms of data sharing in supply chain? What data is shared and not shared? What happens to the data? What are the barriers to data sharing? So I'm really interested in that research. And when you share that data, how do you build capabilities on a more of an ecosystem level on getting better analysis and driving better project management decisions? So I'm really interested in that. I'd be very happy to speak with you about this.
Yeah, that's a really, really pertinent question there, Jez. I mean, we're at the moment from an APM side, and we're doing a lot of work around project data analytics, as you say.
Yes.
It's a kind of developing area for the profession. I know there's a lot of kind of interest in that. So, yeah, we'd only be too delighted to hear more about your research in that area. In the meantime, I just had a question which has come in. And the question was basically from Mr. Allen, who basically has asked, how has this framework been developed and what research has informed this?
So initially, the idea was developed as part of my work with Hinkley Point C Supply Chain Innovation Lab, which is led by Professors Jens Rorik and Ryan Square, who are at University of Bath, who headed that lab. And so for a couple of years, I worked with Hinkley Point C in understanding their approach to integrating SMEs into their supply chains. Since then, I've moved to UCL, and I'm currently at Newcastle, where I've worked with organizations like MACE, like Balfour Beatty, and there are some other big projects that I'm bound by NDA to not name, but I've been working with them and understanding that, yes, there are other barriers to SME integration, or there are other approaches to SME integration into their supply chain. And I've kind of, based on my work with the construction sector, but also financial services sector and consultancy sector, I've tried to now, what I'm trying to do is model a framework which is more generalizable to other sectors, where other SMEs, other supply chains, not just construction supply chains, can actually work successfully with SMEs and integrate them into their supply chains. Because we know after Brexit and COVID, we need to develop a regional capability and tap into the capabilities that we already have. So this was the motivation of developing this framework, and now I think it seems like almost a mix of a number of research projects that I've done. But I'm really glad that I'm kind of on this journey, and I'm learning everything new with every new project that I do.
That sounds perfect. Thanks, Jez. And while we're waiting for any other questions, as I say, there is a Survey Monkey which everyone can take part in following today, which is a post-event survey. And we'd love to hear from yourselves about what did you enjoy, what do you like to hear more of, and how we can make these research webinars even more engaging. Is there any topics, for example, you'd like to hear more about? We've talked about a number of these topics already with Jez around dealing with complexity in terms of project data analytics, so we can certainly explore some of these for future sessions. As I mentioned, I've also included in the chat more details of how to sign up for the event on the 10th of November. So unless any questions come through in the next moment or so, I'm inclined to maybe consider ending the session a little bit earlier than we normally would, just to give people a little bit more time for their lunch back. So unless you've got a question, kind of burning question you'd like to put to Jez, which we can ask on your behalf, we'll start to look at wrapping up the session. Jez has included his details there, so if you want to reach out via email or social media, please do get in touch at any time. And again, I'd very much like to thank you, Jez, for your time today on behalf of APM. It's been a really useful session,
And again, not only just hearing about the current research you're doing, but some of the future research. And again, we kind of endeavour to hear more from you, and love to bring you back maybe next year, and you can tell us about how you're getting, or maybe get some people actively involved in some of your research for a webinar like this. So again, I'd like to wish everyone thank you very much for their time. I know we've had some good feedback already from people talking about it being a comprehensive session. So thank you very much for your time today. It's always appreciated. And we know how busy project managers are, both myself and Jez being, former professionals ourselves. So thank you very much for your time. And
thank you very much.
Thanks, Jez. Thank you, everyone. And if you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to Jez, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Thank you.